Want to know the truth about what happens the moment you finally detach from an avoidant partner? It's not what you expect. The second you stop fighting for someone who's always pulling away, something incredible starts to unfold. Your entire internal landscape begins to shift. Those chains of constant anxiety, they start to crumble. No more exhausting mental calculations about their next move. No more waiting for texts that never come. No more trying to decode their mixed signals or prove your worth. When you truly detach, something magical happens. And it's not just about them. It's about you discovering a version of yourself you didn't know existed. This isn't a story of losing. This is a story of reclaiming. And what happens next might just shock you. The first time you truly start to detach, it feels like waking up from a long, confusing dream. You realize how much energy you've been pouring into someone who was never fully present. An avoidant partner doesn't just create distance. They create a constant state of emotional uncertainty. You find yourself always reaching, always trying to decode their silence, always wondering what you did wrong. But here's the truth. Nothing was wrong with you. Their pulling away isn't about your worth. It's about their fear. A deep-rooted terror of true intimacy that makes them build walls instead of bridges. They keep you just close enough to feel the connection, but far enough to never truly feel secure. When you start to detach, the constant anxiety that used to consume you begins to dissolve. Those endless mental conversations where you tried to understand their mixed signals, they start to fade. You realize you've been fighting for a connection that was never going to happen. It's not about anger. It's not about blame. It's about understanding that their inability to connect is a reflection of their own internal struggles, not a measurement of your value. The moment of detachment isn't dramatic. It's quiet, powerful. Suddenly you're breathing differently. The weight you've been carrying, the constant need to prove your worth, to make them stay, to understand their inconsistency, it starts to lift. And in that moment, you discover something profound. Your peace is more important than their chaos. Your real transformation begins. But transformation isn't instant. It's a process of understanding why you've been trapped in this emotional maze. Emotional dependency doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow dance of giving more and more of yourself, hoping someone will finally see your worth. You've been conditioned to believe that if you just try hard enough, love hard enough, understand deep enough, they'll change. But here's the brutal truth. You can't love someone into loving you back. Your brain becomes a complex navigation system, constantly calculating how to text, when to call, what to say to keep them interested. You become an expert at reading between the lines, interpreting silence, decoding the smallest gestures. This isn't love. This is survival. Every time they pull away, you internalize it as a personal failure. You start believing their emotional unavailability is a reflection of your own value. But it's not. It's a reflection of their own unhealed wounds, their own fear of true connection. Emotional dependency creates an addiction, not to the person, but to the hope of being enough. You're chasing a version of connection that exists only in your imagination. The moment you realize this is the moment everything changes. You start to see the pattern, the constant negotiation of your own worth, the endless emotional labor of trying to make someone stay who doesn't want to be caught. You've been fighting a battle that was never meant to be won. Your worth isn't determined by someone's ability to see it. Your value doesn't fluctuate based on their inconsistent attention. Detachment isn't about stopping loving. It's about starting to love yourself more. The silence no longer feels strange. It settles in, weaving through the spaces where anxiety once lived. Without the weight of uncertainty pressing down, your body begins to understand what peace feels like. It's unfamiliar at first, this absence of emotional whiplash. You almost brace for the next withdrawal, the next surge of doubt, but it never comes. The patterns reveal themselves with striking clarity, not just in them, but in you. The way you softened your needs to accommodate their distance, the way you justified the lack of reciprocity, the way you held onto potential, mistaking it for something real. None of it was love. It was an attachment to the idea of what could have been, and now you finally see it for what it was. At first, the mind resists. It reaches for the familiar, replaying memories that once felt like proof of something deeper. But memory is deceptive, filtering out the moments that didn't fit the narrative you wanted to believe. The cold silences, the mixed signals, the slow erosion of your sense of self. All of it was there, hidden behind the longing to be chosen. Detachment isn't a sudden decision. It's not a single moment of realization, but a series of them, unfolding quietly. You stop checking your phone without thinking. The urge to decode their behavior fades. The questions that once consumed you, why did they pull away? Was I not enough? Lose their sharpness. The answers no longer matter because the need for them has disappeared. Your body adjusts to the shift before your mind fully does. The nervous system, once primed for unpredictability, begins to settle. The absence of their presence doesn't create a void. It opens up space. You start filling it, not with the remnants of what was lost, but with something new, clarity, self-respect, the quiet understanding that love should never have felt like this. They sense it, in ways they might not even understand. The unspoken awareness that you are no longer within reach. Their power came from your willingness to wait, to hope, to try. But now, you have stepped out of their orbit and they feel the shift. A message appears, casual, calculated, a small thread tossed in your direction, testing the waters. Once, it would have sent your heart racing, pulled you back into the familiar rhythm of push and pull. Now it barely registers. You don't need to respond. You don't need to prove anything. You have already left. What you mistook for love was survival. What you fought to hold on to was never truly yours. The hardest part was never losing them. It was losing the version of yourself that believed you had to earn love through suffering. But that version no longer exists, and now neither do they. Some habits take time to die. Even after the decision is made, the body still follows old rhythms, reacting to patterns that no longer exist. The mind too resists, clinging to the comfort of repetition. Without realizing it, you catch yourself expecting something, a message, a sign, an explanation that will never come. It's strange how silence, the thing you once feared, becomes the final proof of what you always suspected. They were never truly there. Not in the way you needed. Not in the way you convinced yourself they could be. The absence isn't just theirs. It's the absence of everything you projected onto them. But even knowing this, there are moments when the pull returns. Not because you want them back, but because your nervous system was wired to their inconsistency. A sudden wave of nostalgia, a song, a fleeting thought. It tricks you, making you question if you made the right choice. The craving isn't for them, but for the feeling of certainty that never actually existed. The mind plays its old tricks, searching for ways to soothe the discomfort. Maybe they weren't that bad. Maybe you overreacted. Maybe if you had done one thing differently, the ending would have changed. But deep down, you know better. The only thing that changed was your tolerance for being kept at arm's length. Then, just as you start to settle into the quiet, they resurface. A message, an interaction, a reminder that they still exist. It's not an apology. It's not clarity. It's just enough to pull at something deep inside you. They never say what you once longed to hear, but their presence alone stirs something familiar. That old part of you, the one who was always waiting for a shift, hesitates for a split second. But now, hesitation doesn't turn into action. There's no rush of adrenaline, no desperate need to decode what they mean. You see it clearly. They aren't reaching out because they miss you. They're reaching out because they sense your absence. This time, there is no response. Not out of anger, not as a strategy, but because you don't need to. The person who would have agonized over what to say, who would have read between the lines, who would have taken the bait, they no longer exist. You wake up the next morning, and they don't cross your mind. You go about your day, and there's no hollow ache pulling you back into the past. The withdrawal is over. The attachment has unraveled. The closure you once chased so desperately was never in their hands. It was always in yours. They don't notice at first. Your absence isn't immediate to them because they assume you're still there, waiting, hoping, holding space for their eventual return. That's how it's always been. They withdraw, you pull closer. They create distance, you find a way to bridge it. This was the rhythm, the unspoken agreement they never had to say out loud. But this time, something is off. The usual signs are missing. No late-night messages disguised as casual check-ins, no subtle efforts to keep the door slightly open, no attempts to decode their mixed signals. You aren't waiting anymore. At first, they ignore it. They assume it's temporary, just another part of the cycle. Maybe you're busy. Maybe you're giving them space. But as the silence stretches, as days pass without a trace of your presence in their life, something unsettles them. They test the waters. A message appears, carefully vague, as if sent without much thought. Hope you're doing well. Or maybe just a like on an old post, an attempt to remind you they still exist. They expect the usual pull, the immediate response, the reassurance that you're still orbiting around them. But nothing comes. This is when they realize you're gone. At first, it's curiosity, then discomfort. The absence of your effort creates a void they hadn't prepared for. They never considered the possibility that one day you would simply stop trying. They assumed that no matter how much they retreated, you would always be there, willing to make sense of their distance, waiting for them to change. So they escalate. They reach for what once worked. Maybe it's nostalgia. I was just thinking about that trip we took. Or maybe it's more direct. I miss you. Words that not long ago would have stopped you in your tracks. Now they do nothing. You see the pattern, the familiar cycle playing out one last time. But this time, you're watching from the outside. You don't feel the need to respond. Not out of anger, not out of pride, but because you have nothing left to give to a connection that only existed on their terms. They don't understand how the dynamic has shifted, how they lost something they assumed would always be there. But you do. And in that understanding, in that quiet certainty, you realize the final truth. You are no longer the person who would have fought to stay. They tried. A message, a reaction to an old post, an attempt to stir something in you. It was predictable, almost mechanical, the way they resurfaced, just enough to see if you were still there, waiting. But this time, their effort met only silence. Not the kind that begs to be filled, but the kind that stands firm, untouched. The pull that once felt unshakable no longer exists. You notice it in ways both subtle and profound. Their presence no longer commands your attention. The thoughts that used to circle endlessly in your mind dissolve before they take hold. The questions that once consumed you. What do they mean? Do they miss me? Should I respond? Are met with nothing, not even curiosity. This is not detachment born from anger or self-denial. It's not a tactic. It's not an act of resistance. It's something deeper, something irreversible. The emotional thread that once tethered you to them has simply unraveled, and you have no desire to tie it back together. You remember when it wasn't this way, when their absence felt like a void, when the smallest gesture could pull you back into the past. But the past has lost its grip. Their name, their voice, the echoes of what once was. They drift through your mind like shadows that no longer hold form. Then, almost as if sensing the shift, they try again. Something more direct. A message that once would have set off a reaction inside you, a tug at the part of you that always wanted to believe there was more. But the response never comes, not because you're withholding it, but because there is nothing in you that feels the need to answer. There is no resistance, no inner battle, no struggle to prove anything. Just the quiet realization that they are no longer a force in your life. And that is when you know, not with fireworks or a sudden moment of triumph, but with a certainty so steady, so natural, that you barely even notice its arrival. You are free. And for the first time, that freedom doesn't feel like a decision. It feels like the only thing that was ever meant to happen. They stop trying. The messages slow, then vanish altogether. No more attempts to test your presence, no more half-hearted gestures meant to keep the door slightly open. For a while they linger in your periphery, watching, waiting, expecting the pattern to resume. But when the silence remains unbroken, when their efforts are met with nothing, they finally understand. You are gone. Not in a way that seeks to punish, not in a way that hopes to be chased. Just gone. Fully, completely, without hesitation or regret. It doesn't feel like a victory. There is no final scene, no grand moment of realization. There is only the quiet understanding that the part of your life they occupied no longer belongs to them. And that is when the last remnants of their presence begin to fade. There was a time when this seemed impossible, when the very thought of them losing interest, of them no longer wanting to reach for you, felt unbearable, when the idea of them moving on seemed like the final wound, proof that you had never mattered. But now, you see how wrong you were. They were never supposed to stay. They were never supposed to be the home you built around them, and their absence isn't a loss, it's a correction. The days stretch out without their shadow lingering over them. The freedom that once felt strange, too vast, too empty, now feels natural. You don't catch yourself looking back anymore. You don't find reasons to revisit the past, to search for meaning in something that never truly had it. You no longer need closure. You no longer wait for an apology, an explanation, a final moment of recognition, because you've already given yourself everything you once needed from them. And that is the true release. Not just letting them go, but letting go of the person you were when you held on. The version of you that questioned their worth, that believed love had to be fought for, that mistook longing for connection. They no longer exist. There is no resistance left in you, no unfinished thoughts, no lingering desire for answers. What once felt like a battle now feels like nothing at all. They disappear from your life completely, and for the first time, it doesn't feel like something has been taken from you. It feels like peace. The absence of chaos doesn't feel like a void anymore. It doesn't feel like something missing, something unfinished. It feels like space, open, expansive, waiting to be filled with something better. Your days belong to you now. There are no more interruptions, no sudden spikes of anxiety, no emotional whiplash keeping you trapped in uncertainty. The energy you once poured into understanding them, into chasing clarity, into proving your worth, you reclaim it without hesitation. And in doing so, you begin to remember who you were before all of this. It happens in small, quiet ways. You rediscover the music you love, not the songs that remind you of them. You revisit old passions, not because you're trying to distract yourself, but because they were always yours to begin with. You laugh, fully, freely, without the weight of waiting for someone to decide whether or not you deserve their affection. There's a new ease to everything. You don't second-guess your words, your choices, your emotions. The self-doubt they embedded in you no longer lingers. You trust yourself again. And then, almost without realizing it, you stop measuring time by them. There was a period when every day was marked by their presence or absence. Every moment was defined by what they did or didn't do, by how close or how distant they felt. But now, they are no longer the reference point. The past doesn't pull at you anymore. You don't feel the need to rewrite it, to analyze it, to make sense of something that never truly had an answer. It simply becomes what it is, a chapter you've already finished. The shift is irreversible. There is no part of you that wants to go back, to reopen a door that led nowhere. The version of yourself that once clung to the idea of them, that once believed love had to be fought for, that once thought this is the best I can get, that version is gone. You no longer miss them. Not because you forced yourself to forget, not because you convinced yourself they never mattered, but because you have outgrown the need for them. And in that realization, something remarkable happens. You stop seeing them as the one who got away. You stop seeing them as a lesson you had to learn the hard way. You stop giving them any role in your story at all. Because this was never about them, it was always about you. And now, finally, that truth is clear. Love no longer looks the way it once did. The old version, the one built on uncertainty, on proving, on waiting, no longer holds any appeal. It no longer tempts you, no longer calls you back into patterns that once felt like home. The shift isn't just about them. It's about what you now know you will never accept again. You recognize the signs instantly, the emotional distance disguised as mystery, the inconsistency masquerading as depth. What once drew you in now makes you take a step back. Not because you're afraid, not because you're bitter, but because you finally understand what love is not. It is not longing. It is not anxiety. It is not the endless push and pull that keeps you hoping, waiting, negotiating your own worth. And because of that, you move differently now. There is no eagerness to prove yourself. No need to shrink, to twist, to convince someone to stay. You no longer mistake their hesitation for something you need to fix. If they are unsure, you are already gone. This is what real self-respect feels like. Not in words, not in theory, but in the way you instinctively protect your own peace. The version of you who once held on to the unavailable, who once believed love had to be difficult, no longer exists. And in that absence, something beautiful emerges. Love, when it comes again, will feel different. It will not arrive as a puzzle to solve, as an enigma to decipher. It will be steady. It will be clear. It will be safe. And for the first time in your life, you will be ready to receive it, because now you know. Love is not about proving. It is about being met. There is no final message, no last attempt to make sense of it all. No lingering pull, no desire to revisit what has already been left behind. The story, once filled with confusion and longing, has reached its quiet, inevitable end. You don't need to mark the moment. It has already happened. Somewhere in the stillness of moving forward, somewhere in the spaces where they no longer occupy your mind, the chapter closed itself. For a long time, you thought healing would feel like a sudden shift, like waking up one day and realizing the weight was gone. But instead, it happened slowly, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to carry. You are not the same person who once held on so tightly. The version of you that feared letting go, that clung to the idea of being chosen, that mistook longing for love, that version no longer exists. And without them, without that desperation, the past holds nothing for you anymore. There is no resentment, no need to rewrite what happened, no bitterness over what could have been. Just the simple truth. It wasn't meant to stay. And now, finally, you understand why. This journey was never about them. It was never about changing them. convincing them, waiting for them to realize your worth. It was about you, about seeing what you refused to see before, about learning to stop chasing what was never capable of staying, about recognizing that real love was never supposed to feel like this. So you walk forward, not with urgency, not in search of something new to fill the space they left, but with the deep, undeniable knowing that you are free. And that is enough, more than enough. If this message resonated with you, consider showing your support with a super thanks. Your appreciation helps keep these words flowing and reaching those who need them most. Every gesture of support makes a difference. Thank you for being part of this journey.